Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing a video on James Tynion leaving DC Comics and what that means for the superhero genre, Marvel, DC, and also indie comic books. So the big news piece here is that A, James is leaving DC, but B, he's going to be off Batman relatively soon, even though he did have honestly very big plans for Batman and a 5-year plan from what I heard in interviews in the past. So seeing that he's leaving so abruptly, he does mention in his newsletter that the reason being is that he had an opportunity to do the new newsletter aspect with his indie creator books, which I'm going to talk about later, and then also to do DC Comics and have an exclusive contract with DC. So he ended up choosing to do indie comics and to do this new newsletter way of releasing comics. So explaining that, he has a new comic book coming out, and it's going to be kind of a Netflix model. So you get to pay every month or pay every year, and you have the opportunity to read this new book before it hits print stands. I'm guessing he's probably going to be pitching this to a publisher of some sort, and that's how we're going to get it into comic book stores. Similar to what Comixology is doing with their originals, which I'm going to dive into the whole Scott Snyder aspect of this as well. So we do have a new way of reading comics. I don't know if there's been other creators that have used this platform to release comics and again have this kind of streaming service idea to release comics, but this is definitely one of the bigger names to do this, especially in the indie world. He hasn't just had smash hits with Batman. He's had smash hits all year round with a nice House on the Lake, and also Something is Killing the Children, and Department of Truth, and this all, I believe, just came out last year. So he's done a lot of great indie comic books that have found success at Image Comics and Boom. So now to have control of his own creations and really kind of be your own publisher for the first release, I think is really huge for indie comics and what type of comic books we're going to get for the future. Not really catering to the market anymore, catering to exactly what you want to write and release to your fans. We've seen that with Kickstarter. We saw that with Noctera, with Scott Snyder, and now we're seeing this happen even further. Literally today it was also announced that the writer of Miles Morales and Miss Marvel, who is taking a different angle in all of this, he's also creating his own creator-owned label and being able to control his own indie books, but he's also still doing the superhero stuff. So he's kind of balancing both. James is going all in and just doing indie comics. Now, I kind of want to discuss also what this means for DC Comics before I discuss what this means for indie comics and the comic book industry in general. So, DC Comics, their biggest hit is Batman, and a big reason of that is because of James Tynion. Like I mentioned, Miracle Molly, all these new creations are a big reason why Batman's doing so well. Obviously, it's also Batman, so I mean the comic book is already going to do well. But really, Batman, I feel like, for many fans, have come back on people's pull list. Maybe people that are not as big Batman fans are like, oh, I really like where the story's going. And because it's so abrupt, I'm curious where DC's going to take this. There's been a lot of abrupt things that has happened in DC in the past couple of years with editors leaving the company and different movements that have been happening. Obviously, Dan Didio leaving as well. So where is the direction going to take DC Comics? And what is Marvel also going to do to react to all this? Are other creators from Marvel Comics going to start leaving and wanting to do their own creator-owned stuff as well? Will there be any A-list creators over at Marvel and DC Comics? I think that's a huge question mark. And what does that mean for superhero comics? Because one thing we've been really seeing is indie comics embracing graphic novels. That's been a big part, and also something we've been seeing with superhero comics and the comic book industry in the past couple of years. Sales are better with trades and graphic novels, and that's a big part of things. But also there's a whole different market for floppies and single issues, the Wednesday warriors like me who want to go to the comic book store and get each chapter. I do hope that the future of Marvel, DC, and in indie comics continue to kind of have the marry of graphic novels and floppies and being able to coexist. I do believe Marvel and DC will continue to do that, but I do think something like this shakes things up. The reason I mention that is because Comixology Originals, where Scott Snyder has taken his company to release all of his books, is going to release, again, originally on Comixology, the biggest digital platform for comic books, and then going to be printed with Dark Horse. They had that deal before Scott Snyder joined. We've seen a few titles come out already, and they did not get released in single issues. They totally got released in graphic novel form. So yes, you are getting the printed comic, but it's not in the Wednesday Warrior way. It is, okay, you have to get this graphic novel to finish the issue, or, finish the series, and then if you want to read it issue by issue, you have to read it digitally. So that does shake things up a bit. But it is also interesting that these creators are still going to publishers. So they're able to make, which is awesome and great, and I think wonderful for creators that deserve creators, but they're able to actually make more money off of it because you do have the fans that want to read it right away, have the subscription service, and again, controlling their own property, and then going to a publisher and saying, hey, I want the retailers to also have an opportunity to sell these books as well. So you're targeting many different demographics and also markets in I think a really creative way and an important way. If we want the comic book industry to survive, we really do need to dive into other ways to sell comics. People love comics. People love the idea of comics, but a lot of people probably don't go, who want to read comics, go to the comic book store to buy a single issue. They might go to Barnes & Noble and be like, hey, I really liked WandaVision. I'm going to buy House of M. They might go to Amazon and be like, I really like, Walking Dead. I'm going to get volume 1 of Walking Dead. Now, I do hope there's opportunities to really funnel those sales more to comic book stores and to allow graphic novel sales to also be a part of comic book stores and really push that there as well. And that's going to be a big conversation in the comic book industry as well. But I definitely think this is a really big movement. I mean, what does this mean for Marvel and DC? I hope it means that we'll get new creators and make them become A-list creators and allow new careers to become bigger because of the properties like Spider-Man and Batman that, people want to just buy because of Spider-Man and Batman, and then allow those creators to build their own careers and do their creator-owned work, which is important as well, and experiment and tell the stories that they want to tell. And I think in a perfect reality, that could be the comic book industry. So I'm really curious to see where everything is going to go, and I really do think there's such a bright future, especially for indie comics, and maybe people that have never read a comic book in their life to have an opportunity to read comics. I'm a huge advocate for Webtoon. I have my own comic on Webtoon because I think that's also another way for people that don't normally read comics to get into comics, maybe have that opportunity to have those popular Webtoons, which we've seen, make it into a comic book. I know that Lore Olympus, one of their biggest comics or Webtoons, is now making trades. They're making graphic novels. So there's the opportunity for even more people to read comics in a different form. And I think that's really important for the comic book industry to move and grow. So I think this is a really, really big movement for the comic book industry in general. And everyone's going to have to react to it. Publishers are going to have to the indie publishers are going to have to react to it. Marvel and DC are going to have to make some big moves if they really want to, I wouldn't say survive. I think Marvel and DC will always survive, but I think if they want to flourish, they're going to have to make a lot of big moves after James Tynion is leaving Batman. Who's going to take over Batman? What does this all mean? What is the direction of Batman? I just think there's a lot of interesting things that are gonna make the comic book industry look really different in the next 5 years. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of James Tynion leaving Batman? What do you think this is going to mean for Batman? But honestly, in the bigger picture, what does this mean for indie comics? What does this mean for DC and Marvel? Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. I hope you enjoyed the more breaking down of the industry side. I know I could probably have just talked about Batman and what that meant for the title, but I really wanted to talk about this from a more business and marketing standpoint. Definitely follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Go check out my own comic books like Father Like Daughter and They Call Her Dancer and the Webtoon I mentioned, Slice of Life. And hopefully you guys enjoyed. We'll also probably be talking more about the Batman side of things on Comic Book Weekly, our weekly comic book podcast that is every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks, guys. Bye.